Welcome to SmithWeekly Discussions, an occasional program for our readers and listeners of SmithWeekly Research. Please note this program is a private discussion and everything contained herein is for entertainment and educational purposes only. With that, we hope you're in a comfortable position, along with your favorite beverage, to enjoy the discussion. Before we get into our talk today, we want to say thanks for questions coming from our audience at SmithWeekly, including Todd A., Gordon S., Jackie A., and Paul M. We have on Scott Hicks, Vice President, Corporate Development of Luminex Resources, an Ecuador-focused gold, copper explorer and developer, advancing the flagship Condor project, among other projects in Ecuador. The company is listed on the Toronto Venture Exchange under the symbol LR, and also on the U.S. OTC markets under the symbol LUMIF. Scott, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So Scott, why don't we start off by you telling us about what attracted you to natural resources, the sector in general, and then tell us why you ended up coming over to the Lumina team and Luminex Resources.
Sure. So, I started out my career in investment banking here in Vancouver, and obviously there was a lot of mining activity, and it was one of the predominant kind of fee drivers in our industry there, and kind of over a decade grew to love it and the intrigue, and then this fairly unique opportunity came up to join Ross, Marshall, and Leo over here at the Lumina team, and work on the things they were putting together both at the time in Brazil and then our main public companies now in Ecuador. And Ecuador is obviously a bit of a new frontier, and these guys were fairly early in 2014, and the project package looked interesting at the time, and obviously we've added to it fairly significantly since I started. So that's kind of what drew me to the team here.
So the Lumina Group has had a series of successes going back to Regalito, Northern Peru Copper, Global Copper, Lumina Royalty, and then Lumina Copper. Tell us some of the keys and characteristics that were in play to make these series of successes, and then tell us some of the things that maybe were unexpected or maybe did not work out as planned.
Sure. So, I think going back to the Lumina Copper days, the group's objective was really to look for, porphyry systems that have large scale potential. Obviously, Leo, heading our geology team, really was looking for deposits that, he could add a lot of pounds fairly fast. And, they took the same approach when looking for projects in Ecuador. And certainly that's what led us to the Cangrejos deposit. And then obviously Leo was a big part of de-risking the projects. But Marshall's background is more, technically focused as far as getting PEAs, PFS, feasibility studies across the line. And, that's really where he came in and started to de-risk all these projects in key areas, whether it's metallurgy, geotechnical, all the different areas. You'd look to de-risk over time and get people comfortable and get major companies comfortable as you look to advance and then sell the projects. It's really not the group's philosophy to build. It is the group's kind of bread and butter to advance these projects and look to move them on to large scale companies. And usually, they're large projects that do require a lot of capital, and you see that with our current project at Cangrejos as well. I guess some of the things that might not have worked. We did try in Anfield Gold to get a gold production vehicle going through the building of the Coringa mine. In the end, that was just a project that got a little bit smaller than we thought was worth our time. So we ended up selling that to Sarabi. But the silver lining out of that is Anfield really got merged into a three-way merger with Trek and Newcastle Gold, which is now the current Equinox Gold. And obviously, they've added assets since and are building the Aurizona project in Brazil, and Ross is the chairman of that. So, we ended up getting the gold production vehicle we were looking for out of it, just in a very different way. But, that was a very different story than Lumina Gold and Luminex, which is more the group's bread and butter of the exploration and development curve.
Right, and I would just say that the team there has the ability to put together build a project out if they have to. I mean, if you look at Equinox, obviously that's taking place, and we'll be commencing with other projects, certainly with Newcastle and the advancement of that project there in California. And so I think that's really interesting that the group really has that ability to do both, whether sell off a project or to build it out if needed, to prove it up makes sense. And then also too with some of the projects that you guys like Anfield, the example you provided there, where the project just doesn't fit, the group understands when it's time to kind of cut the cord and move on. Whereas a number of other companies in the sector will try to live it out and try to dilute their way out and just kind of hang with a project that really never worked, but they'll just stay with it anyway. And so it's really good to have a team that recognizes when an option is exhausted or a project is not worth looking at any further, and they move on to something else. So I think that's key as well. So the Lumina team has been together for a while. Can you give us kind of a look inside the group and how this team manages to agree in a common direction throughout all these different projects and ventures? And then tell us why the Lumina talent is perhaps better than competing teams with similar business models.
I think everyone's kind of got their silo in the group, and obviously, Ross is there on the high level strategy and obviously a strong financial backer, which is in this market, frankly, a pretty key differentiator in and of itself. I mean, obviously not a great bullish market towards the end of last year, but still able to raise, $20 million to advance Congrehouse. So, I think that's a very unique attribute of the group. There's only, a handful of groups in Canada that I think, have that ability and capacity right now. Leo and Marshall have both been with the team since the early thousands and, done so many different projects in so many different jurisdictions. Obviously native, not native, but sorry, Spanish speakers that, and Marshall speaks Portuguese. They've spent a lot of time in these countries, a lot of time on the ground. And, I think that's a bit unique, just the amount of years between the technical staff here and how much time they've spent in these different countries and the networks that provides to source projects and look at new things. And, the ability really of the group to set up management in country, for example. And, in Ecuador, we obviously have an office in Quito. We have an in-country manager there by the name of Diego Benalcázar, Ecuadorian geologist, phenomenal knowledge of the country and the lay of the land there. So really, the group's ability to source local talent, use the networks that we have through South America to advance these projects in a pretty fast manner. I mean, if we put our nose to the grindstone, we can get a lot of technical work done fast, so and done well. So, I think that's some of the unique attributes of the group.
So the natural resource market today, so we've had a first pop in this cycle back in 2016. In your view, where are we today in terms of sentiment, and what are your thoughts on where we go from here in terms of gold, copper, and silver?
Candidly, I'm obviously a bit frustrated. I think, about a year and a half ago, you asked me the same question, I actually did accurately predict what the Fed just did, which is kind of start to roll over here, and it looks like they're going to have to go the other way, despite the rhetoric about the strong economy, etc. What I wouldn't have guessed is that the dollar would still be so strong, and we'd have all these headwinds against gold. I would have guessed that having had the Fed do what they just did, gold would probably be north of $1,400, and that was certainly our view when we were putting together these large-scale gold assets in Ecuador. I think long-term I'm still constructive on gold, and I think as the Fed continues to go the other way, people might wake up to that a bit more. I think on the copper side, it's obviously a key component of our Congrehouse project. It's about 20% of the revenue of the project. I think the long-term fundamentals are good. It might be a bit flat over the next year or two, but on the long term, you've got the declining grade profiles of existing mines. Not a lot of new builds in the pipe right now, and I think as we continue to shift the economy more to an electrified place, copper is going to be a big part of that. So bullish on those two. silver, it's a bit of a mystery to me, and not something I've spent a lot of time on, and candidly not a large part of our projects. But it is interesting to watch the gold silver ratio here. I guess we're almost at getting pretty close to an all-time high, or in that area. I think we're getting close to the 90 on the ratio today. So that's an interesting one to watch, and probably someone will make a lot of money on the snapback there.
So Scott, outside of the focus at Luminex, which is obviously gold and copper mostly, what other metal or other sector within natural resources do you see have an attractive setup as this cycle starts to run?
Yeah, I mean, obviously people are spending a lot of time on battery metals. Is something our group's looked at as well, outside of, kind of our more conventional copper gold focus. So, we did look at cobalt, we have looked at vanadium, and we've looked at lithium, and I think the thinking there is it's early days in that race, and it's tougher to pick a horse, but we think there's obviously very good potential in cobalt, but unfortunately, not as easy to find good projects globally. I think vanadium is an interesting one as we get some of these grid scale batteries coming around. So we're definitely keeping an eye on that closely. But I think for us, it really is the gold copper that we always come back to.
Absolutely. So I'll hang my hat on uranium as something outside of gold. Gold really is the good old steady. And there's certainly not a problem with being in that space, because it really is, even with top good projects at today's gold price, you can still do quite well if you have a good management team and you have a good setup, and you have all the parts needed to do something. The current gold price seems to work pretty well. Obviously, higher prices would be good, but it can certainly work at these levels as well. So let's talk Luminex for a sec. Tell the audience about how this company was set up, the capital structure, the key projects, management, and the key backers on the shareholder roster.
So I think that the key to understanding, Luminex and kind of how it came around is really going back to what's changed in Ecuador. And, for those that don't follow the country, in 2016, they opened up the concession system for the first time in basically a decade. And what that allowed was, a bit of a rush for prospective areas in the country, and a lot of people took advantage of that. And we had a unique advantage in the sense that our predecessor company to Lumina was called Odin, and they had worked in the country for about 30 years, so they had a very healthy database, soil, rock samples throughout all different areas of the country, and that's really what allowed us to stake these prospective areas. And at the time, between Condor and Cangrejos, our two gold projects, it really was a gold-focused company. But we saw, these early-stage tenements coming up that were highly prospective for copper, and they were, the way the system works in Ecuador, you bid a work commitment for 4 years, and then you get a chance to go work on the properties. So from that perspective, they're fairly cheap to acquire, and that's really what led us to bid on all these different concessions. So at the time, this was all in Lumina Gold, and we put together about 135,000 hectare land package throughout the country. So we were probably the second largest landholder in Ecuador, behind Keith Barron, who found Fruta del Norte. He's there in a big way through Aurania. But anyway, the group's history, if you look back, had really been to kind of create wealth through these spin-outs, where you take your most advanced project and leave those kind of in a single purpose vehicle. So that for us, that's Cangrejos, which we put a PA out on last year. And we spun out all these different early stage concessions, as well as the Condor project, into Luminex. Now, when we spun it out, we already had agreements with First Quantum and Anglo-American to earn in on some of these early stage copper projects. So First Quantum's earning in on 2 of our properties, and Anglo's earning in on a very large area in the center of the country called the Pegasus concessions. So, it was nice having that backing, as well as the Condor resources, the kind of core asset of the company, when we spun it out. that's kind of the genesis of the company. We wanted to compress the capital structure, so we did a 0.15 share ratio for every Lumina shareholder. They got 0.15 shares in Luminex. So it's the exact same ownership structure, just really basically a 7-to-1 rollback on the cap structure for the new company. And then fast forward, since we did the spin out, we now have an earn-in agreement with BHP on one of our properties called Tarkey. And that's going to be, I think, one of our more interesting copper projects within the portfolio. And then we've just been continuing to advance these other early stage concessions to really get a sense of what we have.
Okay, and can you give us the shares out on Luminex, and also any of the key backers you'd like to mention on the shareholder roster?
Like I said, it was really basically identical to the Lumina shareholders. So you had Ross, Beaty at about 16%, and then the rest of management collectively together an additional 10. So between Ross and management and Luminex, about 26% held by management and him. And then the share structure, about 41 million shares outstanding right now. We had raised 7 million Canadian inside Lumina last July with the purpose of using all that cash for the spin-out vehicle. So we put about $5 million US on the Luminex balance sheet to start with. And we're sitting at about just over $3 million as of December, and probably closer to 2 in the bank at this point right now.
Okay, so tell us about the planned expenditures for 2019, now that we're on that topic. And then also, what will be funding the company going forward in terms of earn-in, partner carry, equity financings, et cetera?
There's for a small company, it's got a lot going on, but there's about 5 key components. So you've got the Pegasus areas, which is going to be self-funded by Anglo, or self-funding, I should say, with Anglo putting money into that. So their commitment there is $57.3 million over 7 years. So $50 million in the ground and $7.3 million in cash to us, and that would earn them a 60% interest in the projects. And then you've got First Quantum earning into Arcadius and Cascas. So those projects are also fully funded as long as First Quantum's there. They're spending $38.5 million over 5 years to earn 51%. And then you've got Tarkey, which is a copper project that BHP's just agreed to earn in on. They're spending $42 million over 6 years to earn 60%. So those 3 earn-ins are on their own, and they're funded. We operate the First Quantum earn-in right now, but Anglo and BHP will operate those properties, and we won't be working on them anymore. They'll just be earning in. And then you've got the Condor project, which is a 4 million ounce gold project just below Mirador and Fruta del Norte, which are both under construction right now. And that's really where we're going to do a bit of drilling this year in an area called the Camp Zone. And we're also looking at different development options around the existing 4 million ounce resource there. And I think, post the drilling at the Camp Zone, we'll go and decide what we want the work program to look for that year. So that's an area that we will have to fund ourselves. And then on top of that, we've got 4 other concessions that are 100% owned by us that our geologists will continue to work on. So that's an area we need to fund ourselves. So, it's something that will crystallize in the next couple months what the work going forward is, now that we know BHP is coming on Tarkey, and once we kind of get the results from the Condor drilling, to just get a bit better picture of what the next 6 to 12 months looks like for us.
So Luminex has been able to attract a blue chip set of earners, and partners being Anglo-American at Pegasus, First Quantum at Arcadius and Cascas, and then BHP at Tarkey, all while Luminex has 90% of the core asset in Condor. So with this cast of characters being with Luminex, tell us the importance from your perspective as to why investors might need to pay attention here.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, and each property is a little bit different, but these companies were clearly drawn to the potential here in Ecuador, and if you look along the Andes, it's no shortage of copper porphyry systems, and these are obviously three players that are in the copper space in a big way. And I think there's not I can't think of any other company that really has this diversity of large cap players in the name. And obviously, we think putting together this package kind of 7 years of funding that's about $140 million US in aggregate is very unique. The flip side, I think, is BHP and Anglo will really take their time here and do very systematic exploration of those properties. So, may not be drilling at those properties until, say, 2020. First Quantum, we plan on drilling Orchidius. That's one of the two properties they're in on this year. We've got a fairly clear outline of a copper moly deposit or potential deposit there that we've run a bunch of IP over, and that's one that we will drill this year. So, I think there's a high probability that one of these areas turns into a successful project over time, and we're obviously well positioned to keep at least 30% of any of the projects that any of these guys find, and I think that's unique from that perspective. And I mean, at Condor, it's a lower grade large deposit, but I mean, there's a phenomenal amount of mineralization on the property. When we acquired it, there was an 11 million ounce mineral resource that was done by the previous operator on it. We treated that more as a mineral inventory, and then we updated it and put our normal economic parameters and constrained pitch shells on it, and that's kind of what got us to the 4 million ounce resource we're at now. But there's just so much gold on the property. So for those of the people who are listening who do believe in a higher gold price environment in the next several years, I mean, the project has phenomenal optionality from that perspective. So I think that's kind of a long-winded way of answering your question, but to have all these assets in a $30 million market cap company, there's a lot of potential here.
Put the Condor project, I know it's earlier stage quite a bit, and everything hasn't been fully proven up yet and expanded, which there is a lot of room for that to happen. But put it into perspective compared to the Fruta del Norte project that's being constructed, Lundin Gold. Give us some kind of compare the projects, compare and contrast for us, the grade a little bit, and obviously we know this is earlier stage and smaller, but give us an idea for investors who kind of follow the other bigger projects that are under construction.
So, I mean, Condor is a bit of a different beast. So obviously Fruta is a phenomenal underground resource. Condor's got really two segments to it. It's got epithermal deposits in the north, and then it's got a large gold copper porphyry system in the south called Santa Barbara, and those two areas make up the 4 million ounces. So the better analog probably for the property is really actually our Cangrejos project in Lumina Gold. You look at Cangrejos, it's a bit higher grade by about 0.1, 0.15 on the gold side higher. So Santa Barbara is kind of a 0.5 gold deposit with 0.1% copper. And then, Cangrejos has some pretty unique attributes that make it very economic, like a low strip ratio. Whereas at Santa Barbara, the mineralization is a bit deeper, and the strip ratio is a bit higher. So, you do need a higher gold price to make it work, but up further north above Fruta, you've got Mirador getting constructed there, so a large copper gold porphyry. So that that would be analogous in terms of scale and also open pit. That would be an interesting comparison of one just up the road, and obviously a lot of infrastructure is being put in that area. Power lines, etc., and roads for those two projects that will both be coming online here in the next 12 months.
Okay, so give us the status of the earn-in agreements with each party, Anglo, First Quantum, and BHP. Give us the status on that, and just for the people who aren't aware of it, can you just give us a status on whether or not they're fully locked down, binding and definitive, or is there some stuff yet to happen on those agreements?
Sure. So first Quantum, I'll go in order of the way they were announced, I guess. So first Quantum's, fully locked down. They've hit their spend on year one for Arcadius, and that is advancing to drilling. Like I said, we're the operator there. They have the option to take over the project as operator after 3 years. So, we're kind of just over a year in here. And that project's been going well. The drill program there is about 4,500 meters that's planned over 8 holes, and we'll have a pretty good sense of what's on the property post that drill program, and we do have that outlined in our investor deck if people are curious. Anglo, that is fully locked down. That has a definitive agreement on it. They've been operating the property since basically last November. They're doing very systematic exploration. It's hard to impart over the phone how large the land package is, but it truly is a massive land package up there. It's about 67,000 hectares. What they're looking for is kind of clustered copper porphyries that like you'd see in Chile. So that's a focus for them. And our geologist prior to handing it over to Anglo had found a bunch of good signs for porphyry. I mean, there's obviously a lot of gold in the area. There've been alluvial gold production, probably about 100,000 ounces worth in the north at Pegasus A. But looks like there's porphyry systems sitting under that. So their geologists are doing the work right now, and then they'll probably fly ZTEM over the whole area to really zone in on where they want to drill going forward. Tarky with BHP, we had just announced that deal a couple weeks ago here, so we're working towards a definitive agreement. The goal really is kind of by the end of June to have that in place and then switch operatorship and pass it over to their team there. And the thinking is you could probably do IP over the whole area to zoom in on where you want to drill. That, combined with all the work our geologists had done, should give them a pretty good sense of where the high priority targets are.
Okay, well, that sounds great, because I think it's important for the audience, because so many times in the resource sector we have people that, I've got a letter of intent, or I've got this MOI, or some kind of MOU, or some kind of a paper they're waving around, but it really doesn't. It's just they try to say they have a contract for the sake of having a contract, but they really don't. It doesn't have any teeth. And you get that so much in the resource sector. And we're seeing that a little bit in the uranium sector now, where we have people waving these meaningless papers for no reason, really. And so it's really good to hear that you guys have solid lockdown agreements, and that it progresses quickly, and it's a no BS type setup. So I think that's really important for the audience to understand the difference between a contract with no teeth and a contract that really means something in the big scheme of things. So I want to talk Condor for just a moment, a little bit more. Give us the plans for advancing the project, and kind of give us a time frame along with that. So tell us where the status is if we're going to a PEA on that project, and kind of give us a time frame of as you guys want to advance this.
Sure. So the two kind of key areas of work that are happening right now are, as I mentioned, we're planning on drilling the camp zone. So that's up in the north by those epithermal areas I was talking about. So the biggest deposit up there is Los Cuyes. You got just under 1 million ounces in indicated and about 0.5 in inferred. So between the two categories, you got about 1.3 million ounces at Cuyes, around a 0.7 gold grade. The camp zone's right adjacent to that. So we're going to drill about 1,200 meters there over 4 holes in April and May. And what we're hoping to see is that, we can find another basically at surface, chunk of ounces there. And that really might help bring that epithermal area into a place where you could do a PEA on it. The other thing we've done is engaged a group called IMC out of Tucson, and they've really looked at what would the best way to develop this project be. Is it Is it just do a PEA on the epithermal area? Is it have maybe a central plant between the epithermals in the north and Santa Barbara in the south, and you could cherry pick some of the better ore from Santa Barbara and go to a central plant? So they're really reviewing those kind of options for us right now. And I think on the back of finishing that work and the drilling at the camp zone, we'll be able to give the market a more definitive picture of what the next, 6 to 12 months looks like at Condor. So I think, keep your eye out for the drill results at the camp zone. Hopefully we would have those out in kind of the June timeframe. And then obviously with that, we'd like to kind of announce what we're thinking for the asset going forward.
So talk to us high level about Ecuador for a moment and why management likes this jurisdiction. Give us kind of a flavor for the regulatory environment there now, the tax structure, ownership, royalty requirements for mining projects.
Stepping back, the real and primary reason we like it is the geology. I mean, the geology is fantastic. There's mineralization pretty much seemingly everywhere you look. It is extremely underexplored, and I think the reasons for that are both, primarily government driven in the past, but also, it is a harder area to explore. Candidly, there's more tree cover, et cetera, than say, up in the Atacama or something like that. So, the geology is the primary reason. What's really changed since we were there or came into the country is obviously, and Lundin's done a phenomenal job of this in trailblazing, is, you've now seen these investment protection agreements with the government. People have arranged the taxes they need to pay. There is, just so people know, and I mean, they're very upfront about it, and we're upfront about it. It is a constitutional requirement that the government receives a 50% benefit from any project, and that's on an NPV basis. And the way they really get there is the taxes and then the NSR royalties they have on the project. So there's a 15% profit sharing tax and a 22% corporate tax rate. So to simplify, I mean, you can really think about it as a 37% tax. And then there's a royalty range that's about 3 to 8%. And this used to be 5 to 8%, and they've just recently reduced it to the 3 level potentially. So the way you'd go about it is you would submit your project parameters to the government. You would start negotiations on exploitation terms. You would get to an agreement around your royalty rate, and in some instances, prepaying of that royalty a little bit to, have some money go out to communities earlier while the project's being constructed. And that kind of forms the picture of the money that goes out the door to the government. Now, I mean, they used to have, and what really was the killer was a windfall tax in the country, and it really stemmed from coming out of the oil industry. Now, Lundin, when they signed their agreement, had a workaround for the windfall tax that was fairly hard to explain to people. Now, the nice thing is they've eliminated the windfall tax entirely as of 2018. So, reducing the royalty rates, getting rid of the windfall tax, simplifying the system. So everything's directionally moved in the right way. And they've also, made small changes like VAT refunds and reducing the capital gains tax rates as well. So the country's really done a lot to try to bring more mining investment in and show that it is a place that's open for business.
So tell us briefly about, so on Condor, there's 90% ownership by Luminex. Tell us about the pension fund there that's involved with the other 10%. And then also give us the differences in permitting time. Ecuador versus, say, Canada. Give us just a quick flavor for the permitting timeline.
Sure. So on the Condor side, we're right on the Peruvian border there. So the military's ownership was a legacy out of that. They're a 10% holder. They don't currently contribute capital, and they don't currently, or there's no kind of joint technical committee or anything like that. They're just a silent owner. I think longer term, that's probably something that you would look to consolidate 100% of, when the time was right. And I don't think there would be any opposition to that on their side. And, it's discussions we haven't had yet, aside from, obviously just touching base every now and again, but it's something you probably would look to consolidate 100% of.
So actually, just to follow up on that, isn't that kind of a good setup, knowing that the government already has in some form a piece in that, so that could be used as really a kind of a nice optionality type situation there with the ownership, with the pension fund there. And then also give us the timeline for the audience on regulatory in terms of getting a project permitted to go to development and mining stage. Give us a timeline idea and compare that to what it might take, the amount of time in Canada to get the same thing done. And then also tell us briefly about the local community and the local community support for the project, the Condor project.
Okay. Yeah. So on the government, I mean, yes, I think having them there is helpful. I mean, they're obviously would like to see revenues and dollars come out of that project for them at some point. So I think to your point that it is a positive. On the permitting side of things, I'll give you the most candid view I can. I think this is probably the one area where Ecuador has really struggled in the last year, and not so much on the permitting in the way that usually people think about getting to a construction. What's been more challenging for them is actually they've just had so much interest in the country and so many applications coming in. It's really the drilling permits that have actually been the holdup. And they used to require you to do a full-blown environmental impact assessment to drill, and that took quite a bit of time. And the ministry is fairly busy with all the applications. Then in July, the remedy to that was to come out with these scout drilling regulations that allowed you to do exploratory drilling off of 30 platforms, with really just getting an industrial water use permit and not having to do a full-blown EIS or EIA. And we found even getting the industrial water use permits is still a bit slow. So I'd say that has been one of the bigger holdups on the exploration side in country. Now, that said, on the construction side of permitting, Lundin, if you look at them as an example, did their permitting very fast. I think it was somewhere in the 12 to 18 months type range to get their construction permits. So, that would obviously be faster than a Canada or a US. So it's a bit interesting where the time goes on the permitting side. So a bit more heavy on the front end, but then perhaps lighter on the back end from a construction perspective. So that's kind of a quick overview of the realities on the ground there from a permitting perspective.
Okay, and tell us about the local community and the support and some of the work you guys are doing to, kind of work on the local community, which obviously would be key support for building something out.
Sure. So, this is a very key point, and definitely a great question. And I think when you go back and look at the partners we've brought in Luminex, these are obviously companies that are very good at this, BHP, Anglo, First Quantum. It's an area they're extremely focused on. So when you kind of get more towards the Peruvian border and on the east side of the mountains in the country, there's typically more Shuar indigenous people, a lot of different communities, and concession by concession can be very different. There's no blanket answer. It's really important to get in and find out, who the stakeholders are in the communities, talk to them about their needs. Usually it's providing jobs, providing a bit of community support, and really getting that social license to operate. So, our team spends a lot of time on that in the new concessions and around Condor. And, I think in general, we've had a positive experience. Some of these early stage concessions that we picked up in 2016, they've taken a little bit of time to get the social license to be on the land, and whether it's taking samples or building drill pads at Orchidius or different things. It has taken time and work, but it's important work, and you kind of have to build that level of trust, and you have to be there and be present, consistently. And you contrast that with the other side of the country, Congreos over by Machala. That's more of a Colonos area. So we don't have Shuar Indigenous people, say, by Congreos. But that said, there's still communities obviously 6-7 kilometers from the project, and it's important to, be providing jobs and be in touch with the community and really, consult them as the process goes along. And, you never know with these mineral projects how long it'll take to get something into production or whether it's going to be successful. But, keeping the community informed is obviously very important. And, Ecuador, obviously, as part of their EIS process, has a fair amount of consultation built in, but it's something you really can't do enough of.
Absolutely. No, I think it's a key point, a key part of these types of projects is as you advance them and things start to get closer to a potential project that gets developed and a mining operation that commences for, many, many, many years, and how that impacts the community. So why should investors be taking a stake in Luminex today? What would you say to potential investors listening?
I think you've got just an absolutely ton of potential at these 3 earn-in projects. They're getting funded in a way that's not dilutive to Luminex shareholders. You've got a core asset in Condor that's, got 4 million ounces there and gives you a lot of potential in a higher gold price environment. And, a very, very well drilled project, over 100,000 meters of drilling. So, well understood. And, we've still got extra 100% owned concessions in there that, our geologists are working, and there's, even more potential in that. So I think we've got a really good in-country team there that is working the concessions and a great team of geologists on the ground. And then you've got a team with a track record in the Canadian office, with Ross, with Marshall, with Leo, who've worked together for 15 years and have done this a lot of times before. So I think it's a unique investor proposition from that point of view, and that we're not ruling out looking at other early stage projects where we think that'll add value to the company as well. So lots of avenues for growth, a lot of external funding, and in a country that really hasn't been explored properly yet.
How can investors reach out to the company for more information?
They can just send an email to the info@Luminex, and that basically comes to me. I'm always happy to take calls and answer questions when people have them.
And Scott, what's the website again?
It's luminexresources.com.
Scott, well, it was a pleasure. I appreciate you coming on and taking the time with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andrew.